Hey everyone, Konstantin here. I want to show you the new version 1.1 of Workflow. Just one little disclaimer beforehand. Version 1.1 is not completely backwards compatible, so you can open up older projects, but if you still work in version 1.0.6 and you open up a project that was created with 1.1, certain things will not work. However, there is a possibility to downgrade your project, and you do that by going to the main menu and going to the settings. And then you have this option, convert project to older workflow version, and you have version 1.0.6 there. I don't want to do that in this case because, I want to show you version 1.1. So let's dive right in. So the first thing I want to show you is group opacity. I have this comp here and there are some rays that were added. And let me just open up these groups here. And if I would want to adjust the opacity of all layers at once, there's now this option. You see under the group settings this checkbox, use group opacity. So you enable it and execute refresh layout. And now you see the circle appears here as an icon. And now I can change it up to 50 maybe. And you see it becomes much less visible. I mean, I would rather maybe go to 85 or something. You can also just turn off this effect here, which is a bit quicker as opposed to turning it on and off with enable disable group. How it works is if you look at the opacity of a layer here, you see that there's an expression applied to it. But if you know Precomp clones already and prime clones, you know that there's an effect added. It's the same thing with group opacity. So there's now this layer opacity here. And you can also just execute reveal layer opacity, which is Alt F1 or Control 3 on Mac. Here you can dial up or down the opacity of the actual layer. And there's also another function here, which is layers respect group in out. And if I enable that, now I could just move this in out point around and you see it will respect the in out point of the header then. Just be aware if I would move this layer outside, because now the opacity is still on it, it's still applied to it, so you would have to execute refresh layout, and then this effect will be removed from the layer and it will regain its original opacity again. One thing to note with the group opacity, however, is, okay, let's say I'm dialing it down to 50, and I have these shapes here. However, let's say they would intersect. Just because the opacity is just changed for every layer individually, when they overlay, these opacity get added on top of each other. So one new feature I'm really excited about is the improved speed of refresh layout. And this can be really useful, especially when you work on very large comps. However, let's just look at a small comp for now. I'm here in version 1.0.6, so in the older version. So let's say I would move these layers outside of this group and now execute refresh layout. And now let me just move them back inside. And as you can see, the speed is actually quite nice. But now let's look at the example in a very large comp. For example, this is a pretty large comp. Unfortunately, I can't show you the actual visual effects here because of licensing issues. Alright, let's look at this comp. I mean, there are a bunch of layers. There are almost 300 layers inside. So let me show you how fast it is with the old version. Let's say I'm moving some layers here, these layers here, and I would want to move them out of this group. And now I would execute refresh layout. And you see, it takes a bit of time. Let me move them back inside. And it just takes a little bit of time. But for something you execute so often, it would be nice if it would be a bit faster. So now let's look at the same example with version 1.1. So now I'm here in version 1.1 and I'll be doing the exact same thing. So I'm gonna grab these layers here and move them outside. Moving them back inside. And as you can see, it's much faster. Originally, I advertised it as at least 4 times faster. So in this case here, it's a bit slower actually. So I would say at least it's 2 times faster. In some instances, it can be 4 times faster or even more. It depends on a lot of things, whether you've a lot of adjustment layers or a lot of group mats, for example, because all of these have, varying speeds in refresh layout. So I have this Joshua group here, and it's my main character with several layers. If I would want to add an effect in previous versions, I would have to add a group adjustment layer, and then maybe add some curves here. Let's say I would want to make it not so dark. I mean, it's fine and it works well. However, if you would close down your group, you cannot really modify it. You would have to open that back up again. And now there is an additional option, so I would just delete this adjustment layer here for now. Now what you can do is just add a curves effect here and then execute refresh connections. And if you have an effect applied to it, it will automatically create this group adjustment layer. However, every effect that's applied to the group header will be also considered for the adjustment layer itself. If I would dial that up here, you see that now I'm also affecting this character here. So yeah, just be aware, you either have to apply your effects to this one or to the group adjustment layer. Another cool thing is that you can also apply masks to the group header now. So let's say with these rays I want to cut them off here a little bit more. And before that you would have to execute create mat on it. And now this group mat has been created here and I could mask that, right? However, the same thing applies. If I would want to close the group, I couldn't access the group mat without opening the group again. Let me just undo all of that here. So now there is also an additional option. I'm just going to apply a mask to the group header itself and execute refresh connections. And as you can see, now a group mat has been created and it has been linked to the group header itself. And now we want to feather it a bit. However, one thing, if you would move that mat around, you'll see it will be cut off here because it just has been created at comp size dimensions. And if you want to expand this area, you can just twirl it open, go to contents, go to border, and then scale it up as you like. Let me just undo that. One thing, it is important because it will only consider the masks. As you already saw, I actually created a shape path here. This is not a mask. This is, if I go to the contents, this is a shape. But for it to work within workflow, it has to be a mask. So every time I would execute refresh connections on this one, workflow will convert that shape to a mask. You could also just set this to tool creates mask instead of a shape, but if you're lazy like me, workflow will just convert it for you. Just one thing, it will not consider effects that you apply to it. This is important because, as you already saw, this will be considered for the group adjustment layer. If you want to apply something like roughen edges or something to it, so you can define the alpha, I would advise to just use the actual group mat layer, so just change it to that one. Certain refresh connections functions are now integrated into refresh layout. For example, I have these stripes on the waves that are going up, and there's a group mat. And let's just say we also have some curves and maybe some Gaussian blur to it. Let's say I have these two layers here and I would want to move them out of this group. Before that, you would have to move them outside and then actually go to the adjustment layer or the group mat and execute refresh connections so that these things will be removed from the layers. Well, now you just have to execute refresh layout. Now the group mat has been removed as well as the effects. And it obviously works the other way around. Just move them back inside, execute refresh layout, and now group mat as well as the effects have been automatically added. I think it's a nice feature. However, if you prefer not to use it, because if you have a very large comp, it might reduce performance a bit. So you can also go to the settings and go to matting, and you can disable when executing refresh layout, check whether group mats need to be refreshed. And also under adjustment layers, you have the same thing that you can also uncheck. Let's say you have certain layers here and they're trimmed to certain in and out points. And now if I would execute refresh layout now, the group header will now adjust to the in and out point of all the contained layers. And I think this is really useful if you have a bunch of groups that are closed and without opening them up you see exactly, alright, what's the actual length of this group. And this also works the higher you go. So let's say I'm also moving them down like this. And now also the higher group is adjusting to all of the contained groups here. And also let's say I would add a group mat here. You see that the group mat will also adjust to the new size. So let's say I'm extending that and executing refresh layout. You see that the group mat will also extend to that. And as you can also see, the track mat will be. So even if I don't have a group mat here, but let's say I have a track mat and I'm adjusting the length and I'm executing refresh layout, also the track mat will adjust. There's also a way to prevent this. So let's say I don't want this specific track mat to adjust to it. Let's say I want this to be fixed at this out point. But if I would execute refresh layout, it will get to this point again. But I don't want that. So you can come up with the main menu and you hold on Alt or Option and there is this Exempt layer from trimming. And you see that this marker with TTT gets added to it. And now if I would execute refresh layout, the out point will not change. You can also just manually add it, just add a marker and do TTT. If you don't want certain layer types, let's say you don't want generally track mats to be trimmed, you can also just go to the settings, go to trimming, and you can just trim your regular track mats to matted layer and, deactivate that if you don't like that. So as you can see, I have my group here and there's this group mat, and the thing is there's always this track mat now added to every contained layer and it makes it a bit messy. And we don't like messy at workflow here. This is why you now have this option to shy your group mat layers. This is disabled by default because it has some things you have to be aware of, but if you dislike a messy comp, just go to matting in the settings and enable shy all mat merge layers that have only group mat effects applied to them. And I'm gonna hit save. And now all of these layers have been shied, which is quite a nice thing. But let's say I would want to move this layer, for example, but you get this error because I haven't moved the track mat itself because it's shied. So how do we get around that? You can just select your group layer actually, and then execute select group. And if you have a group with shy mats in it, it will not select the group, but it will select the shy mat above. And then it will unshy everything temporarily. Then you can move your mats around and then execute refresh layout again. And then everything will be shied again. But let's say I have this layer here and I want to move it inside of the group, but I don't want to execute select group obviously because I don't have a shy mat above. So what you can do is come up to the main menu and you hold on Control or Command and you click on Unshy Layers. You can also press Alt F5 on Windows, unfortunately no shortcut on Mac. And this will unshy everything temporarily. Then you can move it into the right place, execute refresh layout. And now this has been added. There are also things that make life easier for you with these shy mats. So let's say I want to remove this layer as well as the shy mat above. I don't have to select both of them. Just execute delete layer clone group. And now both have been deleted. Also, if you would want to duplicate them, obviously the shied layers won't be duplicated as you can see. But if you execute duplicate group, you see that the shy mats will be duplicated as well. Or, for example, if you were to create a group, as you can see, the shy mats now will have been moved into that as well. And there's also another thing you can do with these shy mats. Now, if you would execute select group, everything would be unshied temporarily, as we already saw. However, this takes a little bit of time, and if you can get used to it, you can go to the matting section and uncheck temporarily unshy shy mats. Hit save. And now if you would execute select group, you'll see that you'll get the selection icon. This means this is now selected, and now I can move it outside and it will have moved both things out of there. But let's say I would want to move stuff inside of this group. Let's select it. If you place your layers right here, you get this error again. So you have to be careful. Just select it again. And now you see that there's this fine line. You can move it here or you can move it above. And this means you move it above the shy mat. This means you move it below the shy mat. So just move it upwards and then you won't get the error and then you're fine. However, the good thing is that you don't necessarily have to do this. So let's say I have this layer here and I moved it without the track mat and I maybe even moved it in between another track mat here. You know, you get this error, but then you can just execute refresh layout. And now everything has been moved into the correct position and the error message also disappears. Alright, maybe this is something you will have to get a bit used to working like that, but if you can get used to it, it's a bit faster because nothing has to be unshied. Let's say I would want to pre-compose this layer and it is trimmed a little bit here. Let's just use After Effects Precompose. I'm going to move all attributes and call this circle center comp. And I'm also click to adjust the duration to the span of the selected layers. And now, right off the bat, you see, okay, this indent isn't matching up, so I would execute refresh layout. Alright, then I can jump right into the comp. Now I would also have to execute refresh layout. But you see, the layer will turn gray, as it is with layers that are outside groups. But if I wouldn't want to do that, especially for small comps, I would go to the labels panel and click to not label layers outside groups to none. And now it's not labeling to gray. However, another thing I'm also noticing in the pre-comp is that the start point is at 61 frames. Because this is where the endpoint of this comp here is. But very often I want this to be starting at 0. So let's put this to 0. And then yet another thing, I want this comp to be fit to the layer size itself. So what you would have to do then is go to the region of interest and draw around that, then crop to a region of interest. But now, when I go back, you see that the comp will shift position. So there are a few things within the regular Precompose that are a bit annoying. Let me just undo all of that here. Now you have another great option in workflow, which is workflows Precompose. So come up with the main menu and you hold on Control or Command, and there you see this icon, Precompose. You can also use the shortcut, which is Control F1 or Control C on Mac. And I want to choose to move all attributes into the new composition. And then you have this drop down here where you can either set it to comp size and you can even set a margin around that, or you can also set it to custom size, or you can set it to layer sizes and then it would fit to the layer size itself. I would add a little bit of a margin and I would choose to crop layers to their alpha. Because if we would crop it to their source, if you look at the layer here, the source would be that big. But I want this to be fit to the final alpha. So set it to layer size, add the margin, crop it, adjust the duration to the span of the selected layers. Then I can also check to set the start timecode to 0. And I can also already define the custom label setting. So I can choose to uncheck color label layers outside groups to none. This resizing of the pre-comp sometimes might take a little bit. But as you can see now, we have fitted to the layer sizes actually. But the original position has been retained. Also, we don't have to execute refresh layout here again. And also, as you can see, if I would execute refresh layout here, this also won't be grayed out. And also the timecode has been set to 0. One thing about cropping the comp to the layer sizes, this will not be 100% accurate. So that's why workflow by itself will already add a margin of roughly 100 pixels. Another thing that's really great about this Precompose function is that you can also convert your groups to precomps and precomps back to groups. Let's just say we have our stars here and we have matte. We also have a color correction here. Let's just do some group opacity as well. Move it around and also enable the motion blur maybe. So we have a lot of things applied to the group. And now you can just precompose and you'll see this extra option up here. You can either choose to keep this group within the precomp or convert the group to a precomp. And this is what I would want in this case. I'm also going to choose layer sizes, add the margin and just hit OK. And now, as you can see, we just have our precomp here. And you also see that all the attributes, the opacity, the position, everything has been matched. The group mat has been applied just as a regular mask on the precomp, and the hue and saturation effect has been applied to it. And we can go inside and work on our composition here and go back. And the advantage of that is on this one I just have this mask applied once and I just have this effect applied once, whereas in a group workflow would apply to every layer individually, and this can cost you a bit of performance. So converting your groups to a precomp can really help on speeding up your comp. However, of course, then you just have your precomp and it's not so easy to see the structure of all of your layers. So that's why there's also the option to convert your precomp back to a group. Let's just execute Precompose again. You can either just precompose this layer, you can unprecompose all of the layers, or you can convert your precomp to a group again. And I would want to remove the precomp source because we just want there to be this group now. So hit OK. And as you can see, our group has been recreated exactly the way it used to be. And this is something that you can use very dynamically, just switch between groups and precomps. Or if you just have an older project where you just have a bunch of precomps, but you rather want to make use of workflows groups. Alright, so there's one more thing I want to tell you about converting 3D groups. So we have our group here and I just turned it all into 3D, and let's just execute Precompose. And you already see in the sizes you don't have layer sizes, so unfortunately this doesn't work with 3D groups. But in this case comp size works fine, so let's just hit OK. You see that collapse transformation has been enabled. This is because, let's say you would want to move something back. Collapse transformation then ensures that you still have your 3D layers correctly here. However, let's say I would want to have this as a flat plane and I don't want to collapse transformation. So you can just execute Precompose and then click to don't collapse transformation and stick layers to group header Z position. And now you see it hasn't collapsed transformation. So this is just purely a 2D comp now. You see that also the 3D layer switch has been disabled here. So sometimes if you just have a flat layer here, I think this can also be a nice option. Now for another function that actually has been introduced a couple of versions back, but I haven't talked about it yet, which is convert all comps to another layout style. And this is really useful if you want to exchange your project with someone who doesn't have workflow. You just come up to the main menu and go to the settings, and then click on convert all comps to another layout. Up here you can choose which layout you want to use. Most of the time I would say expression mode is what you want to convert your project to, because it removes the indent as well as all the special characters. And then you have also additional options. You can expand all your collapsed groups. Then you can disable the child layers above groups with the potential error message. So above every group header, there's this top layer. This one will display a potential error message if something will get moved incorrectly. This layer now would have an opacity of 100 and display this error. However, if you don't use workflow, this is of course meaningless. And you can also unlock these top and bottom layers. You could also just choose to remove them, which I guess could work if you don't want to give any unnecessary layers to the other person, but workflower needs these layers to know where the start and end of a group is. So if you would get the project back, you would not be able to read group information. And you can also choose to remove all layer and comments, because if you look at the comments, workflow uses those to store certain information. But be aware that workflow on re-importing won't have any information about the groups or other layer types anymore. Alright, let's just convert our project here. It might take a bit, now it has to convert over 50 comps. Okay, right, let's just speed that up maybe here. And now all comps were successfully converted to expression mode. If you look into certain precomps here, you see that all of the indent and everything has been removed from here. And when you get it back, just go to the settings again. All you just have to do is click on convert. Let's speed this up. There we are, everything converted to indented layout. So you already know if you have no layer selected and you execute expand collapse group, you will just collapse all groups. And if you do it again, you will just expand all groups. But this just means the groups at the upper level. But what about the ones that are at least 1 times deep? So there's now a cool new function for it. Just come up to the main menu, hold on Shift, And then you have this option here, expand collapse all subgroups. And I'm going to do this now. It takes a bit longer to execute, unfortunately. But now every subgroup has been closed. And this is quite nice, I think, because sometimes you just want all subgroups collapsed. They're cluttering your view. And now you can just collapse them with one click. And you can also just use the shortcut, on Windows at least, Control, Shift, Alt, and B. So there's also a new select group behavior. Before that, if you would want to select the group, you would have to just select the group header and execute select group. But now you can also just have any layer selected and execute select group. And I think that's quite a nice feature. The only exception to this actually is, let's say I have a group here and I have this group header selected as well as a group contained in this group. Most of the time I would just want to select this group here, this group 1, but not the shapes group. So in this case the shapes group won't be selected. And the other exception is if you use shy mats. So if I have my group mat here, you already know if you execute select group on a layer with the shy mat, you will just select the shy mat above in order to be able to move it around. Those are kind of the exceptions. All other layers that you might have selected will select the entire group. Another new addition is that now you can create clones and comp from text and shape layers too. Just if you haven't seen the tutorial on clones and comps, the advantage about clones and comps as compared to pre-comp clones is that they need less refreshing. I have this example here of this triangle going behind these 2.5D cubes. So this is just a particle layer here with CC particle world, and this is our original layer here. And the opacity is being dropped right around here, and from then on we see this clone layer here. Although we're just seeing that, if I would add a mask to it, this will be directly added to the clone. But before that you would just be able to do that on normal layers that don't have collapse transformation or continuous rasterization. But now I have this text layer here, for example, and alright, let me just maybe delete these layers here. Now I have this text layer that is supposed to go behind them. So I'm also going to the point where I want the clone to start. So I'm going to the main menu and go to clone and comp. I'm setting this to RGBA and split source and clone at the current time and split by opacity. And now I have this clone layer and I will drag it beneath the particles. And as you can see now it will work without a problem. I can just very easily now add a roughen edges effect here, for example, and you see it will update automatically on the clone and comp. Yet another feature that was added in a prior version of Workflow, but that I haven't talked about, is that you can exempt certain layers from being renamed. So you always see that the name will always have this indent, but that can break certain scripts that depend on very specific layer names. So for example, I have this normalized track script here, and this depends on this layer called original base to be called like that. I have a track here, and normalized track normalizes the 3D space for you. So if I would want to add like a text to that character maybe here, and now if I would want to normalize this layer, I'm getting this error because the original base is missing. So what I can do now is select the layer, and this is actually a new function that is added in Workflow 1.1, that you can come up to the main menu and you hold on Control or Command, and then you can click on Exempt Layer Name from Alteration. And now this marker with NNN has been added to it and the indent has been removed. Before that you would just have to add this marker NNN manually yourself. And I think that's really nice because certain scripts generate several layers that you need, maybe 4 or 5, and that you would have to exempt manually then yourself, and now you can just do it with one click. Alright, now I can go to my text layer and now I can click on normalize 3 layers, and as you can see now it goes to exactly the right position. And I can rotate it, place it correctly. Alright, and now we have our text in 3D space. Another thing that I added in version 1.1 is now you can log your activity. And this can be really useful for debugging. So let's say you have an issue and you contact me via a support ticket. It would be maybe a good idea to enable logging and then send me along your log file. So logging is disabled by default, but you can enable it very easily. So go to the settings and go to license and help, and then you see this checkbox here, enable logging. And then you can also reveal the log files here. And there's also the latest one where everything is logged, every function, everything that's being executed. And this can really help me figure out if something goes wrong for you, where exactly it goes wrong. Yeah, something I also didn't cover yet is the KBar support. It's quite easy. As you can see, I already have some workflow buttons here actually. So let's say I would want to, just group this layer here, and then I can just go to create group. And you can just very easily add your new functions. So let's say I would want to create a button for duplicating a group. Just choose your file, the workflow JSX file here, and you can see the script functions. If you go to the user guide, go to installation, and then go to setting up KBar buttons, and then you have the function names here. Let's go to duplicate group. Let's just copy this function name here, call it duplicate group, and you can also download the icon pack from the user guide and go to duplicate group, move it up here, then select my group, hit duplicate group, and now it has been duplicated. About a dockable panel, it will come, I promise. It's just a bit more difficult than it seems, but as of now, the only way to use workflow buttons in a dockable panel is just by, using the KBar icons. Another nice new addition is the advanced duplication. So let's say I have this group here and I have a mask on it, I have an effect on it, and now if I go to duplicate group, now all attributes will be updated actually. Before that, the group mat would still be linked to the old layer, and now it is being updated to this layer. So if I move it around, it is truly updated, and also the effects will be updated. Also the naming will stay in place. So for example, let's say I would just duplicate those with After Effects duplication. You'll see that this will be renamed star right 3. But this would be renamed star right 2 mat 2. But with Workflower, if you would just execute duplicate group just on those, it will retain the correct naming here. As you already saw, you can just duplicate also individual layers. If you would select not the group top, it also has some nice features. So let's say I would have a set mat effect. Okay, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Let's just do it as an example. And it is referencing this layer. And if I would use After Effects duplicate function, the duplicated layer would still reference this layer, but not the duplicated layer, right? And the workflow will also update those if they're included in the selection. So let's just duplicate those. And now, as you can see, this has been updated to the new duplicate, and this is still referencing the old layer. Also, expressions will be updated, but not by default. You need to enable this under when duplicating groups layers, update references in expressions to duplicate, because in some instances there will be like a weird expression error, like some internal error. Most of the time I don't get this error, but just because it was still quite frequent, I disabled this option by default. But the way to get around that is just to duplicate again and maybe again and again, and at some point it will work. And that's the magic of After Effects, right? One last example for a nice new feature is if you create a new group, the group header will now be set at the average position of the layer's anchor points. So let's say I'm grouping these star layers here. You see that the group header now has been applied to the center. So let's just do it with these circles and also with these rectangles. Now it's, nicely rigged, I think. And there's also another cool function that relates to this. So let's say I've moved these layers a bit around here. So right now the group header isn't centered, but you can select the group header or a contained layer, then come up to the menu and you hold on Control or Command, and then you can click on Center Group Header. And now the header will be centered. And this also goes for, let's say I have some position keyframes here, and now I move them around, and now I can come up to the menu again and click on Center Group Header, and now the whole path has been moved as well. Alright, but there are a bunch of other new features. If you just look into the changelog, there are so many new features, and there are user guide pages for all of these new functions. Just look them up and learn a bit about them. And yeah, this has been it for me for the new version 1.1. It took me so much time. It took me like half a year. I originally planned it to be like a few weeks. Well, now here we are, and there are, yeah, like around 50% more lines of code, so it's quite massive. There have been a lot of details that I think are improved now. Yeah, I mean, thank you very much for using Workflow. I hope you have a great time. If you have any new suggestions for new features, just let me know. Also, if you have any bugs, I mean, not that I like getting bug reports, obviously, but I like to get this piece of software as stable as as possible. So yeah, just get in contact with me. All right, this has been it for me, and see you next time. Bye.